In Objective-C, classes have two parts: the header, also known as the interface, and the implementation. You may have started your coding in a single source file. Although this works initially, it won't scale when you start to develop a real app. As your program gets larger, scrolling through a single file becomes more difficult. A well-thought-out solution for that problem exists that just about everyone uses. When I write even the simplest apps for the iPhone, I divide things into multiple files. Because of the natural split in the definition of a class into interface and implementation, a class's code is often split into two files along the same lines. One part, the header, shown here for myworlddelegate.h, holds the interface components. The interface directive, which is code that provides the public view of the class. The add interface contains all the information necessary for someone to use the class. And the implementation file, which is myworldappdelegate.m. The implementation actually defines the class and the code that implements the methods. All the implementation details, such as the @implementation directive for the class, the definitions of global variables, the method definitions, and so on, go into this file with the same name as the class, but with a .m at the end. So the myWorldAppDelegate class has a .h header and a .m implementation. Let's look a little closer at the header file that has the interface. Now remember, this was provided by the template, the utility application template. So far, we haven't had to write any code for any of this to work. As we look in the header file, we find the @interface statement. The purpose of the class interface is to give users of a class the information they need to work with the class. The declaration of a class interface begins with the compiler directive @interface and ends with the directive @end. All Objective-C compiler directives begin with the @symbol. In the interface, you specify the class's name and superclass. That would be right here. MyWorldAppDelegate is an NS object. The class name is MyWorldAppDelegate. The superclass is NSObject. As you see in the quick help, there's an explanation of what NSObject does. It is the root class of most Objective-C class hierarchies. Through NSObject, objects inherit a basic interface to the runtime system and the ability to behave as an Objective-C object. It is the most basic superclass. By convention, class names begin with an uppercase letter. So the interface compiler directive tells the compiler that you're declaring a new class. It declares a new class name, MyWorldAppDelegate, and links it to its superclass, which is NSObject. MyWorldAppDelegate is an extension of the NSObject class. MyWorldAppDelegate will inherit all the methods and instance variables of its superclass NSObject. That means, for all practical purposes, even though you don't see them in your class declaration, MyWorldAppDelegate includes all the instance variables and all the methods that are in NSObject. So because MyWorldAppDelegate inherits from NSObject, it has all the functionality that an Objective-C object would need at runtime. Now, this particular interface declaration does not use variables, but you would tell the compiler about the various pieces of data you want to work with, and they are instance variables as well as methods. The reason they're called instance variables is that when you create an object, you're creating an instance of the class, which means that for each object you create, you allocate some amount of memory for its variables. Variables are not accessible from every nook and cranny in your program. They're accessible only within the function in which they are declared, that is, within the braces. This is also referred to as being scoped to the function. You could also have braces which define a block within a function, in which case the variables are scoped within that code block, as I'll show you in a minute. Now let's look at the main view controller header and interface declaration. Here we do declare a method called showInfo. And since this came from the template, it's actually the template's code. In Objective-C, these lines of code are called method declarations. They make public the behavior that the main view controller has implemented, making it clear to the whole world that this is the kind of stuff any object of class main view controller can do. The leading dash, right here, signals that this is a declaration for an Objective-C method. That's one way you can distinguish a method declaration from a function prototype, which has no leading dash. And that is if you're taking advantage of the ability to use C functions in your Objective-C code. Following the dash is the return type for the method, enclosed in parentheses, the value of what the method returns, which is similar to what a function returns. Methods can return the same types as functions, including the standard types of integer, float, and character, as well as references to other objects, and in this case, IB action. IB action is an interface builder action, and I'll be showing you more of them when we talk about the interface builder. The @end compiler directive does exactly what its name implies. It tells the compiler that you've finished the interface declaration. So the interface defines a class's public interface. This is the place where another developer can go to understand the class's capabilities and behavior. However, it's in the implementation that the real work is described and done. So let's take a look at the main view controller.m implementation file. The implementation compiler directive, right here, tells the compiler that you're about to present the code that implements a class. @implementation main view controller lets the compiler know that main view controller is coming down the pike. The name of the class appears after @implementation here. Now, if we look back at the header again, we'll see that main view controller is a subclass of UI controller. And if we look at the implementation file, we see that the quick help tells you that main view controller is in fact a subclass of UI controller. The UI controller class provides the fundamental view management model for iPhone apps. The basic view controller class supports the presentation of an associated view, support for managing modal views, and support for rotating views in response to device orientation changes. As you look through the main view controller.m file, you see several method definitions. The order of the methods as they appear in the file is unimportant. They don't have to appear in the same order as they do in the @interface declaration in the header file. Take another look at the header file before we do that. As we said before, main view controller is a subclass of UI controller. It is adopting the flip side view controller delegate formal protocol of UI controller. Back in the implementation file, you see that we have defined the IB action method. Besides this method, we have the flip side view controller did finish method, the should auto rotate to interface orientation method, which returns a Boolean value indicating whether the view controller supports the specified orientation, the did receive warning method, which returns a void sent to the view controller when the application receives a memory warning, view did unload, which is called when the controller's view is released from memory, and so on. And once again, the last line of code is the end compiler directive. This tells the compiler that you have finished the task at hand, and in this case, the implementation file. Notice the naming conventions. If you have some idea about how to name things, you can avoid the compiler screaming at you. Here are some areas you need to pay attention to. The names of files that contain Objective-C source code have an .m extension. Files that declare class and category interfaces or that declare protocols have a .h extension. Objective-C is also case sensitive. Class, category, and protocol names begin with an uppercase letter. The names of methods and instance variables begin with a lowercase letter, as in view did unload, did receive memory warning, and so on. But you have to be careful. A class can declare methods with the same names as methods in other classes. And class can also declare instance variables with the same names as variables in other classes. And an instance method can have the same name as a class method. But this can be very confusing. When creating your own classes, it's a good idea to follow a couple of standard framework naming conventions. Class names should start with a capital letter, such as main view controller. Names of methods, such as view did load, should start with a lowercase letter. The names of instance variables should start with a lowercase letter. When you do it this way, it makes it easier to understand from the name what something actually is.